When you see a scoreboard flash Hong Kong, China, that little comma holds a deep, painful contradiction. To understand it, you have to rewind to a desperate power play centuries in the making. Imagine a government trying to stop a foreign drug trade, only to be beaten, stripped of its land, forced to pay reparations, and then compelled to sign agreements allowing the dealers to continue. Not just once, but twice. This was the fate of the mighty Qing Dynasty, crushed by the ruthless ambition of the British East India Company in the First and Second Opium Wars. The story begins not in Canton, but 3,400 years earlier in Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians cultivated the poppy plant, calling it hulgil, the joy plant. This substance, known for its high and pain relief, spread through the ancient world, used for medicine, rituals, and eventually, pure addiction. But it was in South Asia, around the 1700s, that its true menace was unlocked. They discovered that mixing opium with tobacco amplified the narcotic effect, allowing the drug to spread like wildfire across Asia. As Britain swallowed most of the Indian subcontinent during the next century, using divide and rule strategies, one vast ancient empire remained untouchable: China. Ruled by the Qing Dynasty, China was geographically protected and culturally fortified. It adhered to Confucianism, which rejected European religious zealotry. Its economy was tightly controlled through the Canton System, which mandated that all foreign trade vessels dock only at Guangzhou port, overseen by a few wealthy merchants known as cohongs. For years, Great Britain played by the rules, desperate for one product that dominated the global market: tea. Britain was losing massive amounts of silver buying tea, yet it had nothing China wanted in return. Thanks to its ancient Silk Road connections, China truly had almost everything. Driven by a worsening trade deficit, the desperate British made a cold calculation. If they couldn't sell goods, they would sell addiction. Though opium cultivation and use were strictly forbidden by the Qing, the British forced poppy farming in regions like Patna and Bengal, and began flooding China with the deadly product. China fought back, imposing penalties like 100 lashes for possession. But it was too late. By the 1820s, the trade imbalance flipped completely. The British were now selling far more opium than the tea they were buying. By 1830, roughly 3 million Chinese citizens were addicted, with China consuming 85 to 90% of the world's global opium supply. It was the world's first proper narcotics channel. But the drug trade, like water, finds its own level. By 1834, Chinese middlemen, seeking bigger profits, began bypassing the British East India Company entirely, buying the product directly from India. The British were losing control of the very racket they had started. Emperor Daoguang, watching his nation dissolve in a haze of smoke, was paralyzed. A massive debate was held. Should they legalize opium and tax it heavily to refill the imperial coffers? It was a perfect business solution, but a moral disaster. Standing against this cynical compromise was the Qing Dynasty's most charismatic leader, Lin Zexu. He saw opium as an evil thing, brought by barbarians, and he demanded that those who brought it, the British, must be punished. His side won the argument. In 1839, Lin Zexu arrived in Canton, ready to execute a zero-tolerance policy. He raided trading vessels, arrested 1,600 dealers, and destroyed thousands of chests of opium. He imposed a quarantine on the port, refusing to let any British ship leave until all their opium was handed over. For 6 agonizing weeks, the British were trapped. Since China was famously self-reliant, the closure barely registered in its economy. But for the British, their business ground to a halt. They finally surrendered 2.6 million pounds of opium, about 20,000 chests. Lin Zexu didn't sell it or keep it. He hired 500 men to mix the colossal haul with salt and lime juice and dump it into the sea, forcing British merchants to watch as millions of dollars in product vanished beneath the waves. For the colonial powers, who had spent decades pushing the narrative that they were bringing freedom, culture, and free trade to barbaric regions, China was the ultimate frustration. They were already globally connected via the Silk Road, and the gunpowder the British used to dominate the world was a Chinese invention. But the destruction of British assets was the pretext they needed. In 1839, the Royal Navy arrived off the coast of China. The Qing Dynasty, supremely overconfident, believed their land forces were unbeatable and failed to respect the naval threat. They were wrong. The British fleet, including the powerful HMS Volage and HMS Hyacinth, had no interest in a ground war. Their primary goal was to secure a safe exit for their traders and dismantle the trade routes. They systematically destroyed 29 Chinese military vessels. While Chinese mainland soldiers wielded pikes and swords, the British brought massive cannons, reducing forts to rubble from miles away. The campaign was swift and brutal. By 1842, the British had swept through key islands and ports, conquering Chusan, Ningbo, Shanghai, and entering the mainland at Chunpi. Admiral Quan Tai was forced to surrender. In the entire campaign leading up to Nanjing, only 16 British soldiers were killed. Fearful of a direct attack on Nanjing, the emperor finally capitulated. The result was the infamous Treaty of Nanking, the world's first unequal treaty. It demanded free opium trade, massive compensation in silver, access to all Chinese ports, and critically, the outright seizure of Hong Kong. The Canton System was dead. This catastrophic defeat exposed the Qing Dynasty's weakness to its own people. British propaganda spread whispers that the emperor didn't care for the common man. The ensuing chaos fueled the Taiping Rebellion, a massive anti-monarch movement that swelled to 1 million soldiers who wanted a westernized government. The British saw this internal strife as an opportunity. The trigger for the Second Opium War in 1856 was a minor incident. Qing officials seized the Arrow, a vessel registered in Hong Kong on suspicion of piracy. France, whose priest had been killed while promoting Christianity, immediately allied with Britain. Despite the US and Russia initially rejecting the alliance, they watched closely, knowing a victory for the European powers meant profitable new treaties for themselves. With 6,000 troops, the Anglo-French forces attacked and took Canton in 1858. Russia and America quickly shifted, sending envoys and offering military support. The exhausted and technologically obsolete Qing surrendered once more, signing a new treaty. Russia, seizing the chance, forced the Treaty of Aigun, demanding border reorganization and gaining territory that would eventually become the city of Vladivostok. In a final, desperate act of defiance, Emperor Xianfeng, advised by his ministers, ordered the arrest and execution of the messengers delivering the new treaties. This decision was sheer gasoline on the fire. With domestic uprisings finally quelled in India, Britain dedicated the full power of the Royal Navy to punishment. The resulting 1860 assault on the Taku forts saw 11,000 British and 6,700 French troops, backed by 173 ships, systematically destroy Chinese defenses, cutting supply lines, and forcing the emperor to flee. On October 6th, they arrived at Beijing's Summer Palace. Looting commenced, with the palace treasury emptied and priceless artifacts stolen, including 96.5% of the Ming Dynasty's vast Yongle encyclopedia. But looting was deemed insufficient. The British decided the entire palace had to be burned. The consequences were immediate and absolute. China paid the invaders 8 million Chinese taels of silver and ceded the Kowloon area to Britain. The opium trade was officially and permanently legalized, while Christians were granted full civil rights, the freedom to preach, and the right to own land. The European powers rejoiced, opening a vast new market. But for China, the realization was stark. Their ancient ways were dead. The Qing Dynasty, utterly humiliated, descended into ruin. Though the people would suffer horrific subjugation until World War II, the seeds of the self-strengthening movement were sown, a terrifying resolve born from utter defeat. The story of how this 1,000-year-old civilization rose from the dust of those two wars and the century of shame that followed, returning to a world-leading position in only 150 years, remains one of history's most terrifying and enduring comeback stories. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into history. See you next time.